When you're responsible for an army of people, your highest priority is to make sure they have what they need to be successful. Do they have the right tools? Do they have the right training? Are our promotions driving the right activity and helping their businesses grow? What can we do to prepare them for success? Are you promoting the right field leadership? Are you holding those leaders to the high standards that Jerry set out from the very beginning? Every day, I think about what I can do to help make consultants in our business successful. We're in a fight for financial freedom, and I don't feel like a general. I feel like a blacksmith, making helmets and swords and shields. And it's the greatest job in the world. When I look back at the last 5 years at all the hard work we've all put in to get to this moment, I'm proud of what we've accomplished. But I'm also proud of the foundation that we've created, and I know we're ready to turn it on.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. You know, when Jerry and I started Ambit, we knew one day we might have thousands of consultants. What we didn't know was what that would look like. Well, this is what it looks like. You guys are amazing. Thank you for making Ambit Energy the finest, most respected retail energy company in America. Your commitment to Ambit's success and to your own vision for financial freedom is such an encouragement, and we're thankful for each one of you. This is the 5th time that I've had the privilege to speak at our annual conference, and it's one I look forward to every year, but I wouldn't be here without the help of a few special people that I'd like to thank before I begin my remarks. First, I'd like to thank Jerry and Carolyn. The last 5 years has been an incredible adventure full of twists and turns, and the path hasn't always been straight and it hasn't been easy, but Leslie and I cannot think of two people we would rather be partners with than you and Jerry. You're both outstanding in every way, and we appreciate your friendship and your leadership. I'd also like to thank our partner and CIO, John Burke. John is not only a brother in arms, but he's a good friend, and his passion for Ambit is a driving force within our organization, and Ambit would not be the company it is today without his leadership and his energy. Thank you, John. And last but not least, I want to thank my best friend Leslie for taking this journey with me. Stand up, huh? You know, in the early years when the company was small and our future was still uncertain, her encouragement and belief in me were the fuel I needed to keep going. And now that the company's large and our future is assured, her humility and grace keep me grounded. Thank you, sweetheart. You know, I have to admit it's pretty overwhelming when you think about everything that's happened in the last 5 years. And looking out at all of you, I know I'm surrounded by friends who feel the same way. Now, I told you earlier this year at the January simulcast that you're different. Now, I think that confused some people, so I want to clear that up this afternoon. What I mean is you're not normal. Now, let me explain what I mean, because I think that when I'm finished, you're going to agree that you really are abnormal. What I mean by abnormal is that you see the world a unique way. And as a result, your decisions are also unique. You're not like most people. Where most people see obstacles, you see opportunity. That's abnormal. Where most people see problems, you guys see promise. That's abnormal. And where most people see a simple electric bill, you see financial freedom. And I'm telling you, that is abnormal. But I love the fact that we have all these abnormal people here this afternoon. But how did we all arrive here at the same place at the exact same moment in time? You know, the easy answer is Ambit Energy, but I think it's more profound than that. And the real question isn't how, it's why. Why are we here? You see, I don't believe in coincidence. In my worldview, there are no accidents. For me, everything has a purpose. And so I think about things like that. I think about the millions of individual decisions that brought each of us to Ambit at some appointed time and what might have happened had even one of us made a single decision differently. And so when I reflect on it, I can think of at least a dozen reasons why Ambit should not be the phenomenal success it's become. And I can only think of one reason why it is. It's because it was supposed to be. See, I think a power greater than any of us decided that it would be. And if you think about it, that's really the only explanation there could be. It's the only thing that makes sense. And if that's true, then your being here today is important. And in ways you may never have considered. You matter. And what that means is that everything you do or don't do matters. That it's of grave consequence. I believe that. I believe that we're all here to take part in a wonderful experience that's going to challenge us and teach us and change us and ultimately prepare us for the next big adventure in our lives. In other words, there is a purpose for our being here. And so I believe that every move we make and every action we take matters, not just for us personally, but for all of us, and I believe for all time. You know, we're not normal, and we're never going to be normal. But don't worry, we're in good company. History's full of abnormal people, and they've changed the world. I just finished reading a book by Andy Andrews called The Butterfly Effect. And it really helped me see this whole Ambit experience from a new perspective. So I'd like to share some of what I learned from that book today because he talks a lot in it about abnormal people. One of them that you've probably never heard of was a professor from West Hartford, Connecticut named Edward Lorenz. Lorenz was a brilliant man. He held 2 advanced degrees from MIT, one in mathematics and one in meteorology. And as a meteorologist, he was fascinated by weather. But as a mathematician, its unpredictability bothered him. And so he decided that he was going to develop a new mathematical model that could more accurately predict major changes. And for years, he charted the way air moves through the atmosphere, and he spent countless hours studying historic weather patterns until he began to see that even the most minute changes to initial conditions could result in vastly different weather events. And after 20 years of research, he published a paper. It was called Deterministic Non-Periodic Flow in the Journal of Atmospheric Sciences. And that same year, he presented his theory to his colleagues at the New York Academy of Science. And the theory, simply stated, was that a butterfly could flap its wings and set in motion molecules of air that in turn would move other molecules of air, which would in turn eventually start a hurricane on the other side of the planet. Now, his peers and his colleagues laughed at him and called that theory preposterous. But it was interesting, and it hung around. And so it became the fodder for science fiction novels, and it remained for decades a combination of myth and legend only spread by comic books and bad B movies. Over time, it became known as the butterfly effect, a fascinating idea with no real scientific merit. Until 30 years later, when quantum physicists would conclude that Lorenz's theory was not only authentic and accurate, it worked every single time. And not just with butterflies and air molecules either, it worked with anything that had the ability to move matter, including people. In fact, they accorded it the status of a scientific law. Just like the law of gravity, the butterfly effect is called the law of sensitive dependence upon initial conditions. And it works every single time. And what this scientific law says is that everything is connected and dependent upon everything else. In other words, every action we take is powerful. One decision, one act, no matter how insignificant it may seem, can set in motion a chain of events whose ultimate consequences we may never know in our lifetime. So what does any of that have to do with Ambit? Well, I think when you really begin to understand that everything we do matters, that every decision, big or small, counts, that knowledge has to change you, right? I mean, once you understand that you're part of something incredibly complex and that you matter to the whole thing, you have to accept the fact that your life has meaning and purpose. And so your decisions are important. I mean, think about that for a minute. What's the butterfly effect of one person gaining financial freedom in this business? You know, you're here today, and not only does what you do in Ambit matter to you, it matters to everybody else in ways you can't imagine. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking you can't possibly be so important that the entire future of everybody here is shaped by your next decision. Go ahead and think that if you want to. It's a scientific law. I mean, what if I told you, though, that that very scenario happened more than a century ago to an ordinary school teacher? What if I told you that on one day, one man made one decision that still dramatically affects how we live today? See, on a hot, humid day in July 1863, Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain was no longer a professor of rhetoric from Bowdoin College in Maine. He was a colonel in the Union Army, and he was in the fight of his life. He stood at the edge of far left edge of a field at the end of 80,000 men strung out in a line across fields and hills all the way to a little town called Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And he was a colonel because he went to West Point or because he had years of military training. He was a colonel because he was the first man in his hometown to walk into the recruiting station and enlist. Think about that for a minute. He walked in, the guy says, "Great, we have a colonel." Next three guys were majors. A few guys came in after that. They were made captain, and it went on from there. So Chamberlain was not a military man. He was an English teacher. And earlier that day, a Colonel Vinson had placed Chamberlain and his men of the 20th Maine at the end of a line of 80,000 and gave him one simple order. Whatever you do, you cannot let them come through here. Now, Chamberlain knew what was at stake. If the Confederate Army overran his position, the rebels would gain the high ground and the Union Army would be quickly defeated. So in essence, 80,000 men would be caught from behind on a downhill charge with no protection. To win, the Confederates would have to come through Chamberlain. And so at 2:30 in the afternoon, the first charge came from the 15th and 47th Alabama regiments, and they attacked uphill, running as fast as they could and firing at Chamberlain's men who were stationed behind a rock wall that they had thrown up earlier that morning. And the 20th Maine stopped the first rebel charge and pushed them back down the hill, only to face a second, and then a third, and then a fourth charge. On the fourth charge, the Confederate soldiers almost made it to the wall. It was a thigh-high stack of flat rocks that ran almost 110 yards in length. And on the fifth charge, the 15th and 47th Alabama broke open the wall, and fighting raged on both sides. Without time to reload, the men were just swinging their rifles at each other and brawling with fists and knives, and somehow the 20th Maine pushed the rebels downhill one more time. And after that fifth broken charge, Chamberlain's brother Tom appeared with a Sergeant Tolger, a crusty old veteran who had a thick wad of torn shirt stuck in a bullet hole in his shoulder. And he told Chamberlain that they wouldn't be receiving any reinforcements from the 83rd, which had already been shot to ribbons. So Chamberlain asked him if they could extend the line and was told there's nothing to extend, half our men are down. 6 months earlier, the 20th Maine had left Bangor with 1,000 men. They started that morning with 300, and now they were down to 80. So Chamberlain sent his brother to get a quick count of their ammunition, and as Tom left, Chamberlain heard one of their lookouts call that the Confederates were forming again for another charge and that they had been reinforced. And then at that same moment, a messenger stumbled into their midst and announced that Colonel Vinson had been killed, along with Colonel Weeds and Colonel Hazlitt. And then Tom returned and told Chamberlain they were out of ammunition. 1-2 rounds per man were all they had left. Some had none at all. And as men looked at him for direction, his first sergeant, Ellis Spears, suggested they pull out. Chamberlain refused. "We won't be pulling out," he said. "Please carry out my orders." And then he heard the yells of the reinforced rebels begin their sixth assault. and the 15th and 47th Alabama, with their pale yellow and gray uniforms, now reinforced with a Texas regiment, were moving up the hill, and that high-pitched rebel yell coursed up the glade to Chamberlain and his men. And so Chamberlain stepped to the top of the wall in full view, crossed his arms, and stared down at the enemy. And he heard his brother's voice behind him say, "Joshua, do something, give an order." And so Chamberlain stood there for a minute, deep in thought, trying to assess the situation as best he could. He felt sorry for his men. He knew he didn't have any real knowledge of warfare or tactics. He didn't have any experience to fall back on. But Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain was not normal. Where others saw obstacles, he saw an opportunity. And so he turned his back on the men advancing toward him up the hill, and he looked down at his own men, and he said, "Fix bayonets." And at first, nobody moved. They were shocked, and then they realized what he meant. "Fix your bayonets now," he commanded, moving up and down the wall so that every man could hear him. And when they had their bayonets fixed, he turned once again and pointed his sword directly downhill. And facing overwhelming odds, Chamberlain waved that blade through the air, and with a power born of courage and fear, that school teacher from Maine roared, "Charge, charge, charge," to all his men, and then started down the hill. The remaining 80 men lifted their voices to match that of their leader, and they tumbled over that wall and behind him into a history about which most people in our country have never heard. And when the Confederate troops saw Chamberlain and his men charging toward them, they turned and ran. They were certain that these were not the same soldiers they had been fighting all afternoon. Surely they had been reinforced. A battered and outnumbered regiment would never charge. And get this, in less than 5 minutes, Chamberlain had his sword on the collarbone of a Confederate captain. "You're my prisoner," Chamberlain told him, and the man turned around a fully loaded Navy Colt revolver and handed it to Chamberlain and said, "Yes, sir, I am." Within 5 more minutes, that ragged group of 80 men under Chamberlain's command, without any ammunition, captured over 400 enemy soldiers and prevented the Confederates from flanking the Union Army. It's an amazing story, and it's all true. But here's the thing. Here's what most people never consider. Historians have determined that had Chamberlain not charged on that day, the rebels would have won at Gettysburg. And most of them also agree that had the Confederates won at Gettysburg, the South would have won the war, and that the war would have been over by that summer. And so most people assume that had the South won the war, today we would exist as two nations, the Union and the Confederacy. But historians insist that if the South had won, we would now live on a territorially fragmented continent, much like Europe, that North America would be divided today into 9 to 13 countries, which means that when Hitler swept across Europe in 1940, there would have been no United States of America to stand in the breach. That when Hirohito systematically invaded the islands of the South Pacific, there would not have been a country big enough, strong enough, and wealthy enough to fight and win 2 wars on 2 fronts at the same time. Guys, the United States of America exists today because of a single man, a 34-year-old college professor who on one day made one move and changed the course of history. How many people were freed from slavery as a result of that charge? So let me ask you again, what is the butterfly effect of one person gaining financial freedom in this business? Everything you do matters. Every move you make and every action you take matters, not just for you or for your family, but to your Ambit business and to everybody else. Everything you do matters for all of us and for all time. You know, years later, Chamberlain would recall that stubbornness was his greatest advantage in that battle. He said that he had deep within him the inability to do nothing. That when faced with the choice between doing something and doing nothing, he chose to act. 5 years ago, Brian McClure told me no for the 3rd time when I asked him to join Ambit Energy as a founding national consultant. I had a choice. I could take no for an answer and do nothing, or I could call him back one more time. And at the time, that didn't even seem like a big decision to me. I mean, I could have scratched Brian's name off the list of 10 people that we had and moved on. But I'm pretty stubborn too, and so I called Brian back again, and I asked him to assume, just for the sake of argument, that he could build a team in Ambit that was the same size as the team he built in Excel. And I asked him to go get his old downline report and just apply our compensation plan to it and call me back. A couple days later, he called me and said, I'm all in. Now, 5 years later, we have more than 130,000 consultants in Ambit Energy. Over 85,000 of them are in Brian's downline. Steve Thompson, Philip Eckert, Ray Monty, Chris and Debbie Atkinson, I could go on and on. When I think back on the butterfly effect of that one decision, I get goosebumps. How many people have lives been changed from that one 5-minute phone call? Ladies and gentlemen, everything you do in Ambit matters, and it matters now more than ever before. You're here for a reason, and it's not a coincidence. There is a purpose for you being here that matters, and it's bigger than your own financial freedom. You are here to set something in motion that affects people you'll never meet in the most profound way you could possibly imagine. And every phone call you make, every presentation you give, every invitation you extend, every three-way call you close has the potential to change somebody's life. You see, I look at Ambit Energy and this opportunity, and I don't just see financial freedom for people. I see the future possibilities of financially free people doing the things they were created with a purpose to do. I see the butterfly effect of all of your individual ascensions echoing into the future. And I don't think Ambit Energy is a hurricane at the end of some long chain of air molecules moving through the air. And I don't think Ambit Energy is a butterfly flapping its wings. I believe Ambit Energy is a huge cocoon releasing butterfly after butterfly after butterfly, hundreds of them a day, each one with the power to set in motion something that can change this world forever. And most people won't get that. But then you're not most people, you're abnormal. And let me tell you something, your next decision is monumental. Most people spend their lives doubting their beliefs and believing their doubts. And so they trade the precious hours of their life for just enough money to stay exactly where they are, never getting around to the important and unique work that they were created to do. And though confronted every day with the opportunity to choose action by a million indecisions, they just flow through the slipstream of their lives anchorless and without purpose. They're just sleepwalking through life. They don't even know it. They've convinced themselves that they're doing okay, but what they're really doing is building a prison bar by bar. And they don't need a new electricity company. They need hope. They've confused their history for their destiny. They've let past failures and disappointments erode their optimism and steal their ability to dream. And they need a wake-up call. Guys, we're not offering people extra income and some savings on their energy bill. We're offering people a new beginning, an escape from the debt and doubt and fear that's imprisoned them. What we do matters more now than ever. And sometimes I feel like we're the only ones who get it, that the whole world's been lulled into this paralyzing stupor that's dark and sinister as any abyss you can imagine. And that the only thing separating us from them is a pitiful little thigh-high rock wall. But you have something very powerful in your hands. Every day that you get up and take Ambit with you, you're bringing hope and help to people who have lost the ability to believe in either one of those things. And every day that you go out and you take Ambit with you, you're carrying a beacon of light into a dark place where the chains of debt and doubt and fear are holding people in bondage. And I know some of you have been in this fight with us for years, and you're exhausted. And some of you have just joined us as reinforcements, and you're already wounded and running low on ammunition. I'm here to tell you, we're not giving up our position. What we do matters now more than ever. And so it doesn't matter if you're tired or whether you've been wounded or you're out of ammunition. We're in a fight for financial freedom here, and it's time to fix bayonets. This is our moment. And it's time for us to charge into history and set as many people free as we can. So say it with me. Charge! 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 Thank you, guys. God bless you.